So I suppose I should start by thanking Stephen Greep for inviting me to talk to you today. I noticed that the title of the conference is New Research on Fines. Quite a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about is not that new, but I hope there's enough new material added in that you won't be yawning and thinking, oh yes, I've heard all of that before. I promised you crucibles, moulds and more. This nice little illustration from the Museum of London shows metalworkers at work. I'll come back to this image towards the end. Here's another illustration of what a workshop might have looked like. Again, you've got a variety of evidence scattered around. If we look at the metals that are used in Roman Britain, it's quite a good range, and the southwest is no different from the rest of Roman Britain. In fact, the evidence that we've got for metalworking as well as metals is very much the same across the country. What I'm going to be concentrating on today, though, is things that are specific to the southwest. I've only got 20 minutes and I couldn't fit in everything you might like to know about Roman metalworking. And to start with, I'm going to be ignoring iron and its alloys. You've already just heard from Ed about an ironworking site, so that will have to do for today. There are lots of different processes which are part of metalworking. Usually when I'm talking about Roman metalworking, I'm only talking about what I've called here secondary metalworking, what you do with the metal once you've got it. But in fact, in the southwest, we've got quite a lot of evidence for the production of metals. So I shall be starting off looking at those. Now, metalworking is lots of different processes, but they're a chain of processes. So if you mine an ore, you smelt it, you get metal, you refine it to get the alloy you want, and so on. And all of this gives rise to various debris and also the finds that we discover in excavations. And at the end, a lot of the objects that were in use get broken, they would have been recycled. So what we find is only a very small proportion of what would have existed at any one time. So what is it that we find archaeologically? Well, all of these different classes of material. And as I say, I can't cover everything today, but what I'm going to present, I hope, will be a snapshot of some of the things that are specific to the southwest and maybe news to some of you who aren't familiar with the area. If we start off looking at metalworking across England, which is what I'm dealing with, you can see it's a scatter everywhere. There are concentrations, there are voids, as we've seen earlier, this conference with other classes of finds. This is an old distribution map. There are lots more finds since I drew this, but the overall pattern is still the same. If we zoom in on the southwest, again, the same thing is true. You can see you've got a large cluster of finds in, I suppose, what you would now call Avon. I mean, certainly, I started off just looking at Cornwall and Devon, and there was relatively little material there. So I've expanded the southwest to include Somerset and Dorset, Avon, and also Gloucestershire, because that gives me a lot more material I can talk about. I mean, of this, Devon and Cornwall have only produced a quarter of the total sites that I'm talking about. This distribution is in some ways skewed because some of the points here, for instance, Exeter there's a single symbol. There have been lots of different excavations in Exeter that found a range of material, which we'll come on to later. So the distribution isn't quite as skewed as it might appear. And if we look at the major settlements in this area, that's where a lot of the sort of more ordinary metalworking goes on, but there's a lot of non-ferrous metalworking in the rural areas just around these settlements and also further away. So I shall start at the beginning with ingots. They're a distinctive, large chunk of metal. They're not widely found across the rest of the country. So this is one area where the Southwest is, I wouldn't say unique, but unusual. And as you can see, you've got lots of different metals appearing as ingots. You've got a lot of tin ingots in Cornwall particularly, and in West Devon, which is where the tin ores are found. So not surprisingly, there should probably be more symbols on the map, but a lot of the finds of tin ingots from Cornwall are not well dated. So quite which to include and which not was a moot point. But the basic point is this is where tin ingots are found. Lead ingots, again, quite different distribution, mostly in and around the Mendips. Come back to that in a minute. The brass ingots I'm showing you are not produced in this area. They are almost certainly imports to Britain, but they're interesting in themselves. The one silver ingot fine spot nestling on the edge of the Mendips there is East Harptree, where these are small ingots, almost certainly the result of desilvering the lead ingots. And the one gold ingot there is maybe or maybe not Roman, so we should perhaps ignore that for the moment. So if we start looking at tin ingots, this is the ingot from Trethurgy that you heard about yesterday. It's deeply corroded. A lot of the edges, the thinner parts have broken away, but it's a very large chunk of metal, very heavy, difficult to pick up, and typical in some ways of what you find in Cornwall. These are circular or oval ingots, probably cast either in a hollow in the ground or in a stone that had a suitable hollow in it. This is another similar ingot, probably a little bit later, just post-Roman, but as Henrietta said yesterday, Roman really goes on into the 6th century culturally, and this is where this ingot fits in. If we look at the lead ingots, these big lead pigs that are found all over the country, but concentrating in the areas where you have lead ores, so North Wales, Peak District, North Pennines, but particularly on the Mendips, very large numbers of them, and the finds down towards Southampton, almost certainly pigs that were lost on their way to export to the continent. There are a lot of them inscribed, like these examples, but not all of them are, and this can in some cases help date the production. Put on some other ingots. This is the brass on the right, the brass ingot, one of them from Gloucester, small, rectangular, but it's in fact been broken from a much longer strip. Sort of think of a bar of chocolate, and this is one of the lumps. The silver ingot I'm showing you on the left is nothing to do with metal extraction. It's the form of ingot you find in the late and sub-Roman period. The silver ingots from East Harptree are in fact plano-convex, like the tin ingots I've shown you earlier, but very much smaller. So that's the evidence, if you like, for production of, you know, those are the products of the metal resources of the Southwest. But we've also got evidence of how the silver would have been produced, because silver is found as a minor component of lead. And once you've smelted the lead, you can then extract the silver from it by a process known as cupellation, and you end up with oxidizing lead, and you get left behind with the silver. And you can see in the area around the Mendips here, we've got several finds of what are described as litharge cakes. And this is outlining the process. You have silver in the lead metal, you oxidize it, produce lead oxide, which is absorbed by the hearth lining, and the silver is left sitting on the surface. And this impregnated hearth lining described as a litharge cake. But you also get litharge cakes found with a lot of silver, a lot of copper in them as well. And this is from refining debased silver that's been used and is now, before it's reused, it's purified back to pure metal. And these are found not in the metal. If I go back a couple, these are found not in the areas where you've got lead sources, but in areas roundabout in towns, other places. This is an example of a piece of litharge from primary extraction. This is getting the silver out of newly smelted lead. The circles on the screen show you the diameter of a complete hearth base that would have been impregnated with litharge. They're up to 0.5 meter across, enormous big things, very heavy. Typically you have this cream color surface, lead carbonate, and I hope you can just see here, you've got a reddish color, which is the actual litharge itself. The finds from the Mendips are not on this sort of scale. This is from Pentehiling in the Welsh borders, from a Roman site, but they're typical of the sorts of things that you would get. What you have from the around the Mendips are small fragments of this sort of material. And this is an example of a piece of secondary refining litharge. You've got this greeny grey colour, looks completely different, and these are very much smaller cakes, 100, 150 millimeters across, that sort of size. But it's again evidence for metal working, metal refining. And the secondary refining, the symbols there with crosses on, they're from Winchester, from Ewley, from the Temple site, from Hengistbury Head, where they may in fact be late Iron Age, and from Exeter. I haven't actually seen the material. It was recorded by Lady Fox in her excavations, and there are deposits of litharge on some of the large crucibles that were found there more recently as well. There's another process that's carried on in Exeter, or we have evidence from Exeter, which is of parting, which is separating silver from gold. And this, you have very distinctive finds. The process is where you've got a mixture of silver and gold. You can't separate these using cupellation, which will separate the base metals from precious metals. And so what you have to do is to pack your metal into a container with a lid, with a lot of salt in with the packing material. The salt attacks the silver, gold is unaltered, and that's how you separate it. You can then resmelt the packing material to reclaim the silver. And these are some of the finds from Exeter. I apologize for the somewhat lurid colors of the backgrounds, but that's how they are. The top two pictures are the inside and outside of the same two sherds. What you can see there is, although they're oxidized fired, they're not the typical terracotta color. They're rather more pinky purple in color. And you've got here, this is part of the luting material that sealed the two halves, the two vessels together. The glaze on the outside, some of those pieces are sort of dark, deep bottle green. Ones at the bottom, they're much more sort of faded pea soup colour. So you've got a variety of colours, but what is diagnostic for parting vessels is this sort of slightly faded pinky purple colour on the inside. These are unique finds. I don't know of any other parting vessels that look like this, although we do have other parting vessels from Chichester, from London and from Lincoln. So they are known outside the Southwest, but this is one of very few sites that's produced evidence for this process. So now if we move on from that to your more typical metal melting crucibles, a lot of the photos here are not finds from the Southwest because I don't have any, and a lot of the material I've seen was rather fragmentary, but certainly these are examples of the sorts of things that are commonly found across Roman Britain. One to the left, crucible there are examples, quite a number of examples like this from Exeter, and quite a number of them with silver on them. You also get wheel thrown vessels, beakers being used, repurposed as crucibles. One on the left there with a very narrow base, there's an example like that from Gloucester. One on the right, I think, comes from Dorchester. I suspect it had an adventure with a pickaxe on its way out of the ground. And here is one from Cirencester. You can see this beaker has been split vertically and then used as a container for something rather different. It's not just ordinary metal melting. And what's been going on here, if I zoom in on what you've got, in the center you have a depression where gold collected. This was being used to melt down gold filings to make a usable piece of metal to go on working. I hope you can see in the area up here above the central depression, you've got lots of bright specks. Those are tiny, tiny droplets of gold which are trapped in the vitrified layer, and that's what identifies what was going on in this particular crucible. Turning now to moulds. Again, this is a nice example of a mould not from the Southwest for a brooch. You can see it's been made in left and right halves because for this, it's for a trumpet brooch. For this sort of brooch, you'd made this using a lead model like this one. Again, not from the Southwest, although there is, I think, a lead model of a brooch from Lydney. And there are other fragments like this. This is from Dimmock, again in Gloucestershire, and the site came from, they had a trumpet brooch which fitted the mould, so maybe that particular brooch was made actually on the site. Other types of brooch, you have front and back moulds rather than left and right because of the form of the brooch. These are some of the moulds from Compton Dando, which have been recorded by the Portable Antiquities Scheme. And you can just make out, I hope, at the top, you've got a head loop here from a T-shaped brooch, something like this one. Down the bottom, you've got a couple of ribs along the body of the mould that would have made the sunken fields that would have been filled with enamel. And there's another earlier group of material from the same pipe trench that went to Bristol City Museum, including this fragment. And again, you can see the relief decoration on the bow, which would have produced the sunken fields that would have been enamelled. All of these brooch types are the developed southwestern types that Tanya Butcher has talked about. We've seen examples earlier this morning from both Somerset and Devon, I think, didn't we? And so it's very much a local industry. And if somebody is going to look at these brooch types, I think they should also be studying these moulds as well, because they are definitely the smoking gun. This is where these objects were being made. The final thing I want to talk about are the moulds used for casting pewter vessels. Again, these are found in other areas of England, but the vast majority come from the area around Bath, all these square symbols there, a couple examples from Western Cornwall, and there are pewter ingots from the main area of the main concentration as well. There are pewter ingots too in East Anglia, in Yorkshire, up on Hadrian's Wall in London. The next largest collection of these moulds is from Silchester. So it is very much a southwestern industry, but it's also carried on in other parts of the country as well. These are the sorts of moulds that we used. They stacked one inside the other. If you look top left, number 19 would fit inside number 21, leaving a void into which you could pour the metal and produce a little bowl. And this is the sort of mould that I showed you right at the beginning to the left there. There they've got chunks, rectangular chunks of mould material. The ones that have been found are mostly circular. You don't have extra material, but quite rightly they're held together because you're going to be casting metal. You don't want the two parts of the mould to fall apart. There is some evidence that in fact iron clamps were used rather than the rope that's shown here. And you also need to remember pewter scrap would have been readily reusable. These are pieces not from the southwest, from Ickham in Kent, platters on the way to being cut up, melted down, but they give you an idea of the sorts of products that would have come from these limestone moulds. So to conclude, I can say in the southwest, you've got a whole range of metalworking, but things I've focused on today is the production of tin, lead and silver, which we find as ingots. You've got parting and cupellation to use to extract and to refine precious metals. You've got a variety of crucible forms. You've got clay piece moulds. I've only shown you the ones for brooches. There are other examples. And we have finds of limestone moulds which are used for casting pewter. So a lot of metalworking evidence, and some of it really very specific to the southwest. And I just finish off by showing you two free publications you can download off the web if you're interested in learning more about metals and metalworking. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. We can leave that one up actually, I think, so people can get the details of it. That was a wonderfully clear and concise journey through the whole process